So this is a story that has just lit up the internet today in Kenya, and this is around, of course, if you have been online, Ruth Kamande and the sentencing that has just happened. Now, if you're new to this story, this is the short version of the story. I'm going to link to a couple of resources below that will basically give a lot more detail about what happened in this particular story. But the short version of the story is in September of 2015, Ruth and her then boyfriend, now deceased, Farid Mohammed, were engaged in an argument. What happened was that there was a scuffle and there was screaming heard, and there were pleas for help from Farid, and what ended up happening was Ruth ended up stabbing him 20 to 25 times, depending on where you have read the story. Some people say 20, 22, 25. The numbers vary, but I haven't seen any number that is below 20. So what ended up happening was in the morning, the neighbors tried responding to his pleas for help, and Ruth was arrested for murdering him. Fast forward to 2016, and Ruth is crowned Miss Women's Prison, Miss Langata Prison rather, and as soon as that happened, the internet lights up. Some people saying, Ruth is a beautiful, I'm paraphrasing here, Ruth is a beautiful woman, she shouldn't be in prison for too long, or she shouldn't be locked up for long. Other people saying, victim blaming in this case actually, he must have done something to provoke her to kill him, which is an argument that I find completely and utterly ridiculous. For absolute clarity, I do not stand by that argument at all, but that is just my opinion. Fast forward to today, when the news comes out that Justice Jesse Lesiit sentenced Ruth to the maximum possible penalty, which is death. Now, at that point, my personal reaction to that is good. I say this in a particular context. Kenya hasn't actually executed anyone in a very long time, actually since 1987. And even after that, in this entire duration of time, there have been people who have been sentenced to death. However, that hasn't happened up until this point in time. Actually, in 2009, the then President Mwai Kibaki commuted the sentences of over 4,000 death row inmates, reducing them to life sentences instead of the initially mandated death sentence. Now, with that in mind, again I say my personal reaction to this story around the sentencing of Ruth Kamande is good. And let me explain why. This is someone who has ended the life of another human being. This is someone who, by the number of times that they stabbed him, and this is my personal feeling of it, it is something that was very deliberate. And when you think about it now, from my personal experience, having talked to a couple of people who have been in situations of abusive relationships and abusive marriages, it takes a while for cases to build up until that point, because it takes an abuser a while for them to realize I can actually get away with a lot. So a lot of times it starts off with emotional abuse, physical abuse. The level of abuse keeps rising and rising to a point when unfortunately it ends up with the death of someone. And a lot of times before it even gets to that point, a lot of times the victim tries reaching out to other people, but then they don't get the help that they need. They don't get the support that they need. And we end up seeing bits and pieces in the news where someone has been stabbed to death, has been killed, has been shot by their partner. Whatever the case may be, it takes a while, at least by my assessment, for it to graduate to that point. Now, that said, because at that point the abuser in that particular case has gotten to a point where they're justifying their actions, think they can't get away with it, I think that we are at a point where we need to make it clear that it is not fine to be abusive. It's not fine. And that's where I am fully for this particular sentence. It sends, at least I hope it would, send out a signal to people who feel they can get away with all levels of abuse up until the point of murder, that there is actually a system that will look for them and find them and prosecute them to the very end. That is at least my hope out of this particular situation. There's a lot to talk about on this story, but I'd like to know from you, what are your thoughts? What's your takeaway from this? Do you agree with this decision, or do you have a different opinion? Do you think it would have been handled differently? I would love to know your thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please do share them in the comments down below.